Hey guys, Ryan here with DroneKits.us. In this video 2 of our 4-part series on assembling our quadcopter kit, what we're going to go over is installing the motors, the speed controls, your receiver, your flight control board or your copter control board or your KK board, and then your power distribution board. In video 3, we'll cover soldering everything up. But when you get done with today's video, you're going to have what I'm holding here. Hope you enjoy it. Alright, for starters here, we got to assemble our motors. For this process, we're going to need 1.5mm Allen wrench and small Phillips screwdriver. In the box for our motor, we've got the motor itself, and these have like 6-inch long leads for it. So this is a lot longer than what you get on some of the less expensive motors, where you're stuck with those really short leads. These allow you to mount the speed control out a little bit of ways away from them. So. Nice long motor leads. Inside of the little bag we have our prop adapter, and one really cool thing on this prop adapter is there are also set screws. So once you tighten this up using this hole here, so this hole here you use to tighten it up onto the prop, and then if we can spin around and see, there are 2 set screws to lock this down in place. So it sort of acts the same way as the opposite threading ones, where that way you don't have to worry about this prop not going flying off through the air. So very slick feature. We've got our motor mount bracket, our little T-shape here, and then there's going to be 8 screws. 4 of them are short little stubby Phillips, and then 4 longer 1.5mm screws. We'll start with the 1.5mm screws. Take our prop nut and washer off, and then this is our prop shaft. That's going to mount over the top of our motor, and then 4 of these 1.5mm screws go down into it. Take our 1.5mm Allen. Yeah, if this seems incredibly basic, what we did to start out, we took a couple of people who had never put anything RC together, no quadcopters, nothing, and we sat them down and we watched what they did and what questions they had as they put together one of our kits. And this was one of the things that if you've never done it before, that this is you stumble on it a little bit. So what we're trying to do here with these videos is if you're somebody who's thinking about a quadcopter, or if you've never put anything like this together, we're hoping to answer the questions and make it as simple as possible. So again, tighten up those 4 1.5mm screws. Now we're going to flip this thing over, and this is going to be our motor mount. Now this T only mounts on there, or only lines up with those holes one way. If you look, the holes are a little bit further apart on one axis and a little bit closer together on the other. So it's only going to line up one way. The other thing to look for is we've got this beveled section in here on the mount. What that is for is now these screws, if you see, they go in there and they mount flush. If we twist this thing wrong the other way, those screws end up not going in there flush, and they leave that up. So that's the incorrect way. So the way we want to have it is to where those screws fit into the beveled section, they lay flat with our motor mount, and that way when we mount it onto our quadcopter, it's going to sit flat. And again, this only sits one way, so we'll have like that, so that all holes line up. This one we take our Phillips, going to do from here is you're going to do the other 3 motors, so you can open up the other 3 motors and get those finished up. For right now, we're not going to be using our prop nuts or those washers, so you can stick all those in a baggie and set them aside for later on. We're not going to use those until after we've set up our copter control board, after we've set the direction of the motors, and we go to mounting the prop. So we're a little ways away with that. So again, you can save these 2 pieces, put them off in a baggie, and we'll get to those later. So tighten these up. Move on to your other 3 motors, and then we'll be ready to mount these motors onto our wood frame. So this is what you've got when you're all set. Alrighty, as you can see here, I've got my 4 motors put together. I've got my prop nuts and washers saved in a box for later, so I'm going to set those aside. And then I've got 16 number 2 1/4-inch Phillips head screws, and these are going to be for going through here and mounting our motors to our frame. So we're going to bring the frame over. We've got our Phillips screwdriver, and we've got our motors. So what we're going to do is, if you look at the motors, we actually have pilot holes, or the motor mounting pods here. We actually have pilot holes that were lasered in, and those are going to line up with our motor mounts. So take your motor, put it down into place, line it up with the existing motor mounts, or the motor mount holes. Line up the screw. And what you want to do is, once you get that first one in, leave it a little bit loose. So put the first one in, leave it a little bit loose, and that'll allow you to move the motor around a little bit to get the other 3 lined up. So same thing, I'm going to leave that next one loose until I get them all in and started. Drop this one down into position. Last screw here. So now I'll show you. I've got them all in there, but the motor's a little bit loose. So now we've got wood screws going into wood, so we don't need to reef down on this and over tighten it. What we're going to do is just take it down to where the motor mount is tight against the wood, and then add a little more in there. Once it's on there, we should be able to take our motor, wiggle it, and we're not going to move it at all. So there we go. Do that to the other 3 motors. When you're doing it, make sure that you've got the motor leads heading back down the arm, so we can come back here and plug into our speed control. But do it to the other 3, and then we'll move on to mounting speed controls. Hey, for this next step, we're going to install our ESCs. So these are our electronic speed controls. These are the ones that we offer. These are really, really nice. They've got nice 6-inch long leads, so when we mount them up, we'll be able to easily reach down and get to our power distribution board. They've got the bullet connectors pre-soldered on, so it makes for nice clean installation. It's good for 2 to 4 cell lipos. It's a 20 amp ESC, and there is a ferrite bead on the servo lead. So this helps reduce any noise and stuff. Makes for a nice smooth connection, or nice smooth throttle response. And these have the Simon K firmware in them. So what we're going to do here, we're going to mount our ESC on these plates. Power leads are going to be facing in towards our board, so the red and black leads are going to be facing in towards the center of the copter. And then for mounting on this plate, what you want to do is this flat section where the label's on, that's actually the heat sink underneath there. So we don't want to mount it on the flat section where you see a lot of people mount it. You want to flip it over and actually have the uneven portion here on the bottom, the portion without the label. We're going to have that be down. This is the heat sink, and that's going to help by the prop wash and stuff coming down from it. It's going to help keep this ESC cool. For underneath and on this plate, you can either use some double-sided tape, you can use some foam, some adhesive foam, or what I'm going to use is just some hot glue. So what I'm going to do for starters here is, it doesn't need to be a lot, but just sort of a little W of hot glue, and that'll just help keep that from sliding around. And then we've got our slots here for, you can see them top and bottom, right here, right there. This is for our zip tie. So again, the hot glue is just there to reduce vibration so it doesn't bounce around too much. And then our zip tie is actually going to be what holds it in place. Pull that nice and snug. Get the snips here. Zip tie off. So here we've got the ESC mounted in place. Now our motor leads, we've got plenty of room here. If you see, our motor leads go way past where the ESC goes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take those and loop them once around the boom. And then for right now, it doesn't matter what order I plug these in. Later on, when we set up our copter control software, we'll test the motor rotation, and if the motors are spinning in the wrong direction, all we'll have to do is flip-flop 2 of these leads. So if your motor's not spinning in the direction that you want it to, you just take 2 of the leads, switch them, and now that motor will spin in the opposite direction. The next thing we're going to do is, if you look, we've got these holes here that go through both of the top and the bottom plate. So I'm just going to take my servo lead and feed it up through there, because this is going to come up here and plug into our copter control board. So there's the first one. Just go ahead and do that to the other 4, and then we're ready to move to installing our power distribution board. Okay, for this step we're going to flip around upside down. If you look, there's 4 holes laser burned in there for pilot holes for your power distribution board. Should be able to see them. I'm going to take our power distribution board and 4 of the small 1/4-inch screws. This step's pretty simple. We're just going to take the board, line it up with the holes, and then snug those 4 screws down. And there you go. Hey, we are ready to install the flight control board. One quick update here before we put these all to production. What we did is we widened the shelf up a little bit, and we've added 4 additional holes. So if you don't want to use the CC3D and you'd rather use a KK board, we've actually got all the mounting holes and everything in there. So all you would do is just skip the step of epoxying in our CC3D standoff, and you could go and mount this directly underneath this shelf. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our CC3D board. We've got 8 O-rings and then some 5/16" stainless steel screws. Those O-rings fit tightly over those screws, so you can actually stick the screws through the board and then push the O-rings on the bottom side, and that'll hold everything in place. You can see I've got my 4 screws and my 8 O-rings. Every O-ring we're just going to double up to give us a little bit more thickness. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our cable here. It's a lot easier to put it in before you mount this board in place. So take a cable, snap that into place. There we go. You can sort of feel when it sort of snaps into place and goes completely seated. And now we're going to drop our copter control board down into place. Line them up with the screws, or with our screw holes. and snug these up. On these, we really don't need to go too tight. What we're doing is we just want to compress those O-rings a little bit. Those are going to be used for the vibration dampening. We've tried flying these without any O-rings or any grommets in that place, and let me tell you, it didn't go well. At times, it seemed like everything was fine, but all it takes is a little bit of vibration or a little bit of oscillation to come in, and basically the quad just flips right out. So no matter what type of flight control board you're using, you want to use some sort of a grommet or some sort of a vibration dampener in between there. Those screws and the O-rings would also work for the KK board. So if you were putting the KK board in there, you'd do the exact same thing with those screws and the O-rings up underneath, and then just put that instead. So again, there we go. And now we are ready to install our receiver. Alright, we're ready to plug in our ESCs and install our receiver. One real quick tip here, on the Spectrum brand receivers, see if I can get in close enough to where you can see. If you look on this one right here, there's these little tabs. Oh, try to get this just right. There's little tabs that prevent you from plugging in some servo connectors the wrong way. Those tabs are actually going to prevent you from plugging in these flat, square servo connectors. So if you're using just Spectrum brand, what I did is I took my case apart and I actually just used a Dremel and ground off the tabs on mine so that the square ones would fit. Now if you're using a FlySky, FreeSky receiver, those plug in just fine. If you're using Turnigy, those plug in just fine. But again, I couldn't get mine to plug into this Spectrum, so I took the case apart and ground off those tabs so that these will all plug in now. So for starters, what we're going to do is we are going to get our ESCs plugged in. So if you're standing behind the quad, the forward left ESC, this is going to be motor number 1 when we're setting up our copter control board. So I'm going to figure out what one this is, and then we're going to take that in and plug it into the CC3D spot mark number 1. I don't know if you can see in there, but these blue connectors right here, these are all labeled 1 through 6. On this electronic speed controls, the orange wire is the signal wire, so that is going to be closest to the number 1. Oh, hopefully we can get in there and see that. But so we're going to have the orange wire closest to the number 1. Number 2 here. Number 2 is going to be our front, this one right here. So the front right-hand motor. Which cable that is. It's this one right here. So that is going to come up and get plugged into spot number 2. Again, with the orange wire facing in or closest to the numbers. So we're going to just go right around the board here. This rear right-hand motor. That one's this one right here. That one's number 3. And then the rear left is going to be number 4. Move all these wires around here to the back. And again, we can pretty this up with some zip ties and stuff later, but now that those are plugged in, we can take our board and put it up here on top. I'm going to take my receiver. You could use some foam, some double-sided tape, whatever you want. I am just going to take, again, just a little bit of hot glue, hold this in place, and I'm going to take one zip tie, come over top, do that with it out in place here. So there we've got our receiver in place. And then for this top board, what we did is we gave you slots to be able to use a zip tie in this place. You could glue the board down if you want to, but it makes it tough to get in there and do anything with the CC3D board, or to swap that out or change anything. So, and definitely if you go with the KK board, you need to get in there and be able to push the buttons and stuff a little bit more often. So I'm going to use the zip ties to mount this up above. Helps if I get it in the right tab here. Tie there. Zip tie through the slot on the board. Bring this down into position. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my antenna wire, feed it down through here. I'll take some zip ties and pretty these wires up a little bit. Okay, what we've got here, I added a few more zip ties just to sort of help control these wires a little bit. If you look at your receiver, somewhere on there it's going to indicate which wire goes where, or which the direction the wires go. So you're going to have positive, negative, and then you're going to have signal. For this one, for the Spectrum receiver, the signal wire is actually closest to this description of the channel. So if you look, every single one of these positions where a wire goes, it tells us what the channel is, and then it also tells us what, it just tells us which channel it is. The signal wire is that pin closest to our description of the channel. So, on our cable coming from our CC3D board, there's one with all three. This is where the power is going to come from the CC3D to the receiver. That white wire is the signal wire. So I'm going to take that one and I'm going to plug it into my throttle position. The rest of these, unless you're doing multiples and you want to have it all set up the exact same way, the order of how these go really don't matter. The rest of these only just have one cable going to it, so only one wire, and all of those wires are the signal. So the rest of them you can put into this position, and then later on when we're setting up our CC3D board, we will actually map all of those to the correct channel. So again, unless you've done multiples of these and you have a specific order in which you want them to go so that all of yours are set up the same, then the order of those really don't matter. So here we go. The next thing I am going to do is just add a couple beads of hot glue to help tame these wires down a little bit. Put a bead right there. Press this over into place. I'm going to do the same thing over on this side. Press these into place. So there we go. Everything's all installed. Now we are ready to move on to video number 3, where we will go over soldering up our power distribution board.